Welcome to this evening's Festival of Ideas online. Although we're in a different format, the festival continues to aim to enhance York's reputation as a city of ideas and innovation through offering the highest calibre of public events. The 2020 festival had over 60 online events offering an inspiring programme for all ages. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and I hope very much you enjoy it. My name is Matt Matravers, and I work at the University of York. I'm a legal philosopher, but occasionally I get to do things that are useful like this. A few technical notes. If you're watching live, you can ask questions using the Q&A button on your screen. This is available throughout the talk, so questions can be asked at any time. Should you have technical issues such as a loss of Wi-Fi, you can rejoin the event using the original link. Please also remember that today's event is being recorded, so you will be able to watch again. Now it's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Tim Dowling. Tim first came to Britain from America at the age of 27. He's the author of several books, How to Be a Husband and Dad, You Suck, and more recently has written and read a short audiobook on the subject of cynicism called How to Be Happy All the Time. But probably what most of you know him for is his regular Guardian column. In that column, Tim chronicles a life of small nothings, and has done for 12 years. And that raises the question, what happens when a global pandemic shrinks life to a claustrophobic domestic sphere? Some of us adapt, some of us protest, some of us reassess our goals, and some of us, like Tim Dowling, barely notice the difference. So here he is to tell us about his life in his shed.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here. It's great to be talking out loud. I would like to thank Matt and Joan and everybody at the York Festival Ideas for having me back again this year. I'm beginning to feel that I delighted you long enough. As Matt says, I've been doing this column in The Guardian for a long time. In fact, it was 13 years ago this month that I was invited to replace Jon Ronson, who was at the time writing a popular weekly column at the front of the Guardian weekend magazine. And I was given the whole summer to think about what I might want to do with it, because Jon would not be stepping down until the end of August. The only guidance I received from the editor of the magazine came in a short email. She said, "I don't want you to feel that you have to write about your own life." I couldn't tell whether that was like an open invitation, write about whatever you want, or an instruction, do not write about yourself. But I had 3 months to figure it out. September arrived very quickly, and I panicked. I couldn't think of anything. In the end, I wrote a column about the dog and the cat following me around the house all day. I wondered if you could get fired from a column in the very first week. But nothing happened. The piece just ran, and no one said anything. I felt that I'd been given a week to get my act together. For the next issue, I managed to concoct some kind of a 700-word parody, but within a fortnight, I was panicking again. I hadn't been doing it a month, and I'd already run out of things to say. Luckily, that week, I got knocked off a taxi. I got knocked off my bike by a taxi. So I was able to write about my wife's amusingly callous reaction to my injuries. But I couldn't keep a column going by hurting myself every week. I wouldn't survive it. And then Christmas came very, very quickly, and the deadlines were rolled forward, as they are every year, as I would soon find out. I didn't have time to come up with anything new or inspirational. I just wrote about fights I was having with my wife, fights about money, fights about the children, even fights about the column itself. My wife opened the magazine in bed one Saturday morning, sighed very long and loud, and said, "I miss Jon Ronson." It wasn't, in fact, until I think early spring that I managed to construct a sort of humorous essay that wasn't about me. It was something with a point. And I thought this could serve as a template for all future columns. This really might work, I thought. And then that week, I got the only other email I ever received on the subject from the editor. And it just said, "What happened to the funny wife?" So really, you can see that when it comes to the subject of my column, I painted myself into this corner. I have absolutely no one to blame. The editor seemed happy enough. But in those early days, a lot of people failed to see the need for a column that didn't seem to be about anything. As Matt said, a chronicle of small nothings. In late August of 2009, which is about almost exactly 2 years after I'd started, and long before anyone could leave comments under columns online, I returned home from a holiday to find a letter from a reader, a Mr. Crow. It was helpfully forwarded to me by The Guardian. And he was, I mean, as far as I could work out, you know, he was a human being. This is not a fable. And that letter, which was forwarded to me, said, and this is just a prop, by the way. I mean, I didn't save his letter. Dear Mr. Dowling, I read your story in Weekend Magazine. It was pathetic, boring, and very banal. Try again, though. Now, the worst bit of that, the most infuriating part, is that last bit. Try again, though. It meant that when Mr. Crow saw my column in the paper the next week, he would think that I'd taken his advice, that I'd decided to put past failures behind me, and with his encouragement, have another stab at it. Sometime later, the era of online comments arrived, and I discovered that the world was full of Mr. Crows. Every week, people would read my column and then sign in solely to say either, what was the point of that? Or, well, that's 4 minutes of my life I'll never get back again. I would always think, no, you won't get them back. Those minutes are mine now. Not that long ago, somebody sent me a tweet that said, how do you get paid to write this shit? And I sent him back a tweet that said, buy backs. And then he sent me a tweet that said, if only your column were as funny as that tweet. I think he won that one. But this is the problem. This may be the very problem foreseen by that magazine editor all those years ago. The problem is writers writing about their own lives. A writer's life is pretty ordinary in many respects, but the ways in which it is not ordinary are not interesting. It has neither the advantage of great excitement or variety or much affinity with the lives of everybody else. It's hard for readers to see themselves in your story if you never go anywhere and you never do anything. I sit in a box all day, this box, by myself. People, I think, find it difficult to sympathize with someone who, in the complete absence of work colleagues, leads a solitary, paranoid existence filled with imagined enemies, some of them animals. Or someone who, blessed with all the time in the world, finds it difficult to concentrate on one thing for the space of even an hour. The biggest problem is, hardly anything happens to me, and I still have to leave a lot of that out. I was once at a party with another columnist who wrote about her life, and she went on for a bit saying that she really resented the intrusion into her privacy and the need to peel herself week in, week out for a paying public. And I said, I never think about that. I just worry that not enough stuff happens to me. You know, when you take away all the time I spend staring out the window while trying to suppress a rising panic, there just ain't that much left of my day. My story was my life. It's my fault for making the column about my life. And like Mr. Crow said, my life is boring, pathetic, and extremely banal. I don't know what Mr. Crow's life was like. One exciting boat chase after another, I expect. But he did have a point. It can be a terrible struggle to strike a chord with the public mood when the highlight of my week is sometimes an argument with a squirrel. My problems just aren't other people's problems. Then lockdown came. The pandemic reached these shores, life went into suspension, the normal social framework evaporated overnight, and to be honest, I barely noticed. I just carried on as always in my shed. Nothing's really that different. My pets are not suddenly thrilled to have me home all day. I think they'd actually prefer it if I got out a bit more. From mid-March, Guardian's Saturday magazine had to be published with most of the staff working from home. They were absolutely heroic in keeping it going without a pause. But to be honest, that made very little difference at my end. They moved my deadline from Monday back to Thursday, but then again, they tend to do that every Christmas time. They shrank the size of my column by about 35 words to accommodate some rejigging, but you know what? That's happened over and over the years. Sometimes it goes up a little, sometimes it goes down a little, every time they change the layout. The editor sent me an email asking if I thought I could make it work under these difficult circumstances. And I said, I don't see why not. I'll just carry on as before. Actually, at first, I toyed with the idea of not ever mentioning the global pandemic that had worked its way into everything else we read. I thought I might carry on in a bubble of pretending that absolutely nothing had changed at all, like the Archers did. But of course, I couldn't not mention it. It affected everyone else, including the people who live in my household and who've had to spend way more time with me over the last 14 weeks than anyone would consider healthy. What I didn't realize at first was I was really ready for this. It's as if I've been prepping for lockdown for a decade. I never go anywhere. I already wash my hands a lot. Social distancing is and always has been a guiding principle of my existence. This new and delicate ballet of human coexistence where you cross the street at the first sign of someone else's approach. I've been doing that instinctively all my life. I can make it look like I was always intending to cross the street at exactly that point. So you don't have to teach me the rules. You don't need to put up that sign outside the shop that says only one person is allowed in there at a time. If I saw someone else in there, I probably would wait it outside anyway, or walked around the block until the coast was clear, just like always. But here's something else I didn't expect. For the first time in 12 years, a huge number of people were reading my column and saying, wow, that was exactly like my week. I too now live a life of vastly reduced circumference. I too just spent an hour arguing with a squirrel. I also conduct social interactions under a cloud of discomfort, suspicion, and fear. I can't focus or manage my time. And everyone seems to be having the same weird conversations that my wife and I have. Once a day, I go for my exercise and I try to end it at the shops and I try to come back with what I was supposed to get. And my wife says, the other day, she said, did you remember lemons? And I said, lemons? Are you joking? There are no lemons out there. We're living in a post-lemon environment. And she said, well, so what's in the bag? And I said, limes. They can't get rid of limes. Above all, people are learning that life in lockdown is boring in a way that's also nerve-wracking. To which, what can I say except welcome aboard? But this is weird, I think. And it's also, at first, I thought, it's kind of embarrassing. Suddenly, everybody knows what it's like to be me. This has never happened to me before. But I think I might be relevant. In some ways, I have to admit, the very thought of that fills me with unease. Self-isolation may be the lifestyle I've always practiced, but it's never one that I recommended. I couldn't even really give people advice about working from home. I can't imagine how I'm not sure how you're supposed to do it, but I can't imagine I'm doing it right. All I can think to say is, unless it's your dream, you probably wouldn't like it. People ask, how do you cope with the loneliness? And I think, what are you talking about? They ask, so do I have to get dressed in the day or what? And I think you're missing the point. The whole day is one long disgusting secret. Nobody has to know. Don't ask, don't tell. Over all these years of my voluntary self-isolation, to me, it was only ever workable against a backdrop of everybody else leading adventurous, active, outgoing lives. It turns out that I liked knowing the world was buzzing along there without me. When the cancellations came, there was suddenly nothing for me not to go to. Lockdown may suit me, but I know it isn't good for me. if my social reluctance isn't regularly challenged, I can quickly become irretrievably weird. I need to be dragged to things. I need for there to be parties that I don't want to go to, that I go to anyway. About 2 weeks into all this, I was summoned to my first online social event. And I realized this is going to be much, much worse than actual socializing. I downloaded the app they sent me the link to, a house party, I think it was, and it was much worse. It's like a party, except I can see my own face when I'm talking, which, by the way, is happening right now. And I think I look so scared. Do I always look scared? There are 3 or 4 friends of mine, little heads in a grid, all in their kitchens. After a few minutes of fuzzy, juddering conversation, a stranger appeared in the top left corner. Somebody in the group knew him, but not me. I didn't realize this was going to be happening. At first, I couldn't be sure if it was someone I knew or not, because everyone my age, all my friends, have to wear these, thick reading glasses in order to see their screens, so they don't look anything like their party selves. But I realized I didn't know this person. Then another stranger appeared. Then another stranger appeared. And then one of my friends froze and disappeared because his connection was poor. And I suddenly realized I was one technical glitch away from a conversation populated by people I'd never met. I quickly, in my paranoia, imagined a worst-case scenario in which, after a series of hideous accidents, I was left alone in a virtual room with Margaret Atwood. They say she doesn't suffer fools gladly. She probably wouldn't take to me then. After that, as everybody knows, things just carried on. It was scary when all this started, and consequently pretty exciting. I could write about tedious things because the implicit subtext, we're all going to die, lent everything a little drama. But life now has the quality of an endurance test. When I started writing under lockdown, I imagined doing it for, a month or so. I think I've now filed 14 consecutive columns in which lockdown is the only real subject. And each time, out of necessity, I am writing about less than before, about tinier and tinier slices of life. And it still seems to strike a chord with a lot of people. For the moment, anyway, we're all still in the same boat. So, to be honest, it has been a life-changing experience, even for me. I haven't learned too terribly much, but I've learned a few things about lockdown that I honestly didn't know before. The first is that we are all truly herd animals. We may not have herd immunity, but we certainly have a herd instinct. In normal circumstances, we lead a variety of lives with different rhythms. But once a lot of us are obliged to live the same way, we often end up doing the exact same things at the exact same times, even while we're trying to do the opposite. First, we all hoarded loo paper together. Then we all got angry with one another for hoarding loo paper. Then we all went to the park on the same day. Me too. Then we got cross with each other for that. Then we created rolling shortages of flour, yeast, paracetamol, thermometers, seeds. Every time I thought I had an original, individual craving for something, I would go to the shop to find that particular shelf completely bare. Each time I thought I'd discovered an unusual and unpopular time to nip to B&Q, I would find that 800 people had the exact same idea as me. My wife is currently waging a personal war with a group of faceless people who seem to be trying to buy up the world supply of slimline tonic water. To judge by our cupboard, she's winning. We all follow the rules as one, and then we all break them together, hopelessly and helplessly. Among other things, lockdown is an infuriating way to discover there's no such thing as free will. Second thing I've learned is now become clear that we used to really muddle through existence chiefly by buying lots of stuff. Even I have noticed a giant shopping-shaped hole in my life. I try to keep up online. Every day something new I ordered arrives at the door, big or small, but it's not enough. Thirdly, slowing life down seemed a lot more desirable when life seemed to be moving too fast. When you have loads of time on your hands, slow things are strangely unrewarding. It's maddening to spend your day watching plants grow or bread dough prove. Lockdown calls for lots of small, brief distractions, shorter books, quicker films, hasty meals eaten in rapid succession. Concentration, I find, is something you can only really achieve in the context of wider distraction. It's harder if there's nothing to shut out. Lastly, I realize I've been very, very, very lucky over the last few months. I know a few people who are extremely ill with coronavirus, but no one close to me has died of it. And I haven't been ill a single day since lockdown started. My works carry on as normal without a break. If anything, I'm slightly busier. And I've never been more grateful not to have children of an age where I might have to homeschool them. My youngest son finished university this week, and while I may have had to nag him to stay on top of things from time to time, I have not had to expend 1 ounce of energy trying to understand what his course actually involves. Anyone isolating with grown children knows that after a few weeks you reach an equilibrium where they're only awake at the same time as you for 4 or 5 hours a day. It's not actually that hard. What I'm saying is, I can afford to miss lockdown, and in many ways, I will. I will miss the silence, which in London, if I open my door right now, you'd hear nothing. In London, this is a hugely precious commodity. Everything happens with a sort of thrumming backdrop of airplanes and motorway traffic. I'll miss evening walks through abandoned residential streets lined with bunting. I'll miss exchanging friendly greetings with strangers who live at the far end of my daily circuit. In a lot of ways, this has been more social than my regular life. I will certainly miss driving in zero traffic. I will miss organizing my day around meals, like you do when you're on holiday. I'll miss pretending everything is harder when really it's much easier. Most of all, I will miss writing about my boring, pathetic, and extremely banal life and feeling for once like the whole world gets it. Thank you very much for listening. Oh,
thank you very much.
Thank you for coming back, Matt. I was worried.
I just want to leave you staring into the void. It would have been cruel even by my standards. So we're going to be joined now by Joan Concannon, who's the Director of External Relations at the university. And many of you will know Joan. She often pops up at the end of Festival of Ideas events to explain what's happening and what's going to happen at the next week. And indeed, the Festival of Ideas was Joan's idea, and she's been the pioneer of it, and it's an enormous pleasure to have her join us. And the format from here is we are monitoring the Q&A, so don't think your Q&A are being lost, but Joan and I are going to have a chat with Tim for 15-20 minutes, and then we will start to incorporate into that the questions you've been sending in. So
thank you, Tim, for being such a regular and stalwart. I think for the benefit of just our audience, if nothing else, because we did have a private chat about this, could you confirm that you are actually speaking from your shed? I noticed a couple of questions already about that. I think people are feeling quite excited that they have an exclusive preview into your working life,
yes,
dull though it is.
This is my shed. I can pan a little like that. I'm embarrassed because it's rather nicer than I've ever let on. I try to make it sound like, at the very least, like it's leaking all the time, but it's pretty watertight, and it's lovely right now. But this is it. Sometimes it feels like you're in one of those little boxes at the end of a giant car park at the airport, where you say to the guy, "I lost my ticket," and he says, "Well, you have to pay the full fare then," and that's his only job. And it's, but I sometimes think I would enjoy that job.
Is that the table, the legs of which you are improving?
Well, out the window.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it.
It's not that we stalk you.
I put on top of it to try and keep the rain off it, but it's not working.
There is a slight element actually of, because we both read your column, I don't get out of bed on a Saturday morning until I have read whatever the hell it is you're up to, and simultaneously feeling very sorry for your other half, usually. But there is a slightly stalkery quality to an event like this, where we are actually sitting inside your head. That makes me feel slightly uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable. Well, how do you imagine I feel?
So now that we have mentioned your wife and the kids, what the kind of domesticity, because quite often your columns are centered around the domestic life, including the animals and the squirrel. What's been the worst and what's been the best aspect of that? I guess, you mentioned that they had not perhaps been anticipating spending quite such a proportion of their time with you. How's it going in domestic land in COVID lockdown?
I'd say it's we are rubbing along terribly, terribly well. It has to, all things considered, and I think that's partly because, with a few exceptions, the weather has been amazing, which means somebody can always be sitting outside, and it just means that there are sort of three spheres of like places to be. And I think we've also, I think partly because nobody can do anything. You have no reason to yell at your children for not doing anything. It's like they can't go to work and they can't go to university. So it's like if they sit in their bedrooms all day playing video games, you think, well, that's probably fine. So nobody's really angry with anyone. And we talk a lot about what we're going to eat. And in that sense, it is a bit like being on holiday. I think the hardest thing about it is that I've really lost my sense of concentration, and I like to have something on the go, like a larger project on the go, because I'm a freelance writer effectively, and that means I have days off at unusual intervals. I never know when a Thursday is going to come along that I don't have anything to do for. So I like to have something going, but I can't concentrate on writing a book. I can barely concentrate on reading a book. I think a lot of people out there are having that same problem, from what I can tell.
It's interesting. Somebody was tweeting the other day about audiobooks. They found reading physically a book really difficult, but having it on in the background was more comforting, which I haven't quite found yet. But
I find listening to anything, even a podcast, quite difficult because my mind wanders.
Well, I was going to say, and that's not a plug for Tim's audiobook, which is available from Apple Books, How to Be Happy. But then Tim said he couldn't be bothered to listen to things anyway, so rather ruined that commercial moment.
But I should also give a shout out for Fox Lane Books, who will be happy to sell any of Tim's physical books to you as well, who are the festival bookseller.
And I will sign them.
Excellent.
Remotely.
Book plates. That's the future.
Just following up the title of that book, Tim, I mean, I think some people might think, given your talk a few minutes ago, that are you really in a position to advise people on how to be happy? Do you think you're happy?
I think I am. Writing a book about cynicism was surprisingly difficult, because I think cynicism is, for most of us, is a bit of a pose or something you have from time to time. But I find this kind of idiotic optimism just comes leaking through all the time. I am quite optimistic about things, and I honestly don't mean to be. So I am strangely happy. I mean, I think I'm confused a lot of the time, which makes it hard to be happy. And I think being happy all the time would be a difficult thing to manage anyway.
Do you think there is for all of us a sort of gap between your self-presentation and you? I mean, because I notice you talk about being self-isolating and so on, but it's interesting looking back at your columns, whenever you have to do something, the line before you do it often is, so I found the middle one and told him he was coming to the shops, or I found the oldest one and told him he was going to the garden centre. And
yeah.
I'm not sure whether that's, I mean, it could just be an instance of, the more I see of other people, the more I like my own. Or it could be that actually company is something you like more than you let on.
I don't like being completely alone. I think of the term we used to use in our family for that when they were small was errand friend. Someone has to be dad's errand friend. And there were never any volunteers, I can tell you. But I was from when they were a baby, when the oldest one was a baby, I was like, if I had to go to sort of PC World to buy a new printer cable or something, I just found if you put him in the car seat and strap him in, then it's not like you're talking to yourself. It's like you're having a conversation, even though he doesn't understand anything. And I do find that sort of company. Also, I think it takes having someone there, even if it's your own child, sort of makes the social interaction with other people easier. With Italian shopkeepers. That's my sort of true nightmare.
Your children as props.
Foreign language. Yeah, like props, and ideally they should be at an age where someone can smile at them and mess up their hair. They're a bit big for that now.
It might look a bit strange.
I don't know.
So I was interested in the herd animal, herd instinct thing, where it does feel like we are all inadvertently doing the same thing at the same time.
It's infuriating, isn't it?
I'm going to ask this to both of you. What is the bizarrest thing that you think you've bought during lockdown that you wouldn't even have contemplated prior to?
I've bought so very much. I bought a pedal steel. Well, it's not a pedal steel. It's called lap steel. It doesn't have pedals, which is a sort of electric country music instrument, which I cannot play at all. But then I found out you could buy one for £99, and they deliver it the next day. So I just thought, I'm having that. And,
okay, well, I was not expecting you to say that.
Did I? I'm sorry. Was there a prepared answer that
I can find that very easy to answer. I bought a ring light, which turns out not to be something that's used by proctologists, but a light for casting light on one's face as one does things like this.
Oh.
And it's because the way my study is set out, I seem to come from the darkness on the left, and although that fits my personality very well, I decided I should have a light. My wife laughed hysterically when it arrived, and it went straight into a cupboard until this moment when it came out.
I think that's quite a good purchase, actually.
Well, it's my justification is that obviously now I'm a kind of professional. I'm hosting Tim Dowling, so I need a ring light.
I think that justification is all I need to get one now.
Available from all good shops.
I don't have one.
Yeah, I'm actually seriously contemplating that myself now.
Apparently, they're much used by Instagram influencers. I have no idea what this is, but apparently they have ring lights.
I'm a micro influencer myself.
I'm just looking at some of the questions that have come in, Tim. So there are several about the tortoise and how the tortoise is managing lockdown and whether the tortoise has survived the encounter with the glue.
He has, yeah. He's fine as far as I can tell. He's had. I can't see him, so he's probably gone in. But he did the glue didn't phase him at all. The only thing that really phases him is a sort of spell of bad weather when he can't come out. But he's fine. I saw him striding around the garden this morning. He tends to be a sort of outdoor animal from now until October. And then we bring him in, and then he becomes a sort of kitchen doorstop.
I have to tell you, there are several people asking, please don't take this the wrong way, that, essentially they'd prefer if your wife joined the conversation. As she's currently waiting for her dinner, people, I just don't think that's necessarily a good idea, because she's going to demand that Tim goes to the kitchen. I
think she's working her way through a box set that I declared myself not interested in. So I'm not going to disrupt that. Because she's not really allowed to come out to this shed, to be honest.
Very wise.
Is it a man shed in the traditional sense?
It is a man shed in the sense that anything that I own that she doesn't like has to live out here. It's not in the house. So I have there's a large storage element to it. Not like, this is an impressive array of books, but not that many of them are mine. They're sort of hers that she doesn't want thrown away, but she doesn't want to keep in the house.
We have an anonymous attendee who doesn't mind outing her friend, or at least I'm assuming it's a her. Could you give my friend Fred any tips for dealing with squirrels? He also has a serious squirrel feud that is taking over his life.
A feud between him and a squirrel.
I assume so.
Two rival squirrels. My wife has discovered a very long-range water pistol, which is, it looks like a sort of rifle, and you just dip it in a bucket and you draw out the thing, and then it's a one-shot thing where you just squeeze it like that, and it shoots about 30 feet. And she uses that on the squirrels and the parakeets and the pigeons. And now when she comes out with it over her shoulder, they all leave. She doesn't even have to fire it anymore.
That's really interesting, because we have a jackdaw and a magpie, just the one magpie, and I'm not superstitious, except I am, who stalk me in the back garden. One of them sounds like a chainsaw, and the other one just stares at me, and I'm going, and this is going to be my weird lockdown thing, I'm going out to buy a water gun.
Yeah, they're really handy. I mean, when you go to the sort of site where they sell the water guns, all the comments underneath, all the reviews say, this is really great for squirrels. They have no other use, as far as I can tell. That's my number one tip. The other one is, if they have a nest, just stay out of their way. The squirrel has got a nest just back there, and he's quite aggressive as a result. If you go near it by accident, he comes leaping at you.
So we do have some serious questions. Well, I'm not actually sure what this is, but it's just so brilliant and sort of reminds me of your columns. I'm just going to read it out. Hi, Tim. I've always lived stepping between two worlds, inner and outer. I guess I'm sort of an intro extrovert. It's situational to some extent. Though the circumference of my outer society has indeed shrunk, I'm happy in this period of the pandemic to focus on minor local matters and music, writing, TV, garden. Sorry, I've forgotten my question at this point. All the best.
Yeah, well, I've forgotten my answer. I think that's true. A lot of people who consider themselves introverts, a lot of whom are a lot of writers are, because I think at the end of the day, it's not a bad job for a candidate. One of their complaints is always, but we saw you at a party, or we saw you giving a speech. How can you be an introvert? And it's one of those things, it's something that introverts can do. But I think the problem with being introverted is that you sort of have to psych yourself up for everything. And I don't mind sort of psyching myself up to do some kind of performance, or give a speech, or talk to a large group of people. But to have to do it just to go to the shops every day is a huge drag. And I sort of rather wouldn't. If I don't have to buy shoes at a shop, I won't. Or if I can get one of my kids to come with me, then it's, let him do the talking.
What was your childhood ambition?
I think when I was a child, I wanted to be a cartoonist. And actually I was for a while. When I first came to London, I did a bit of cartoon work. I had a couple of cartoons, and I think I had a weekly cartoon in the Observer magazine for almost a year. And until they briefly got rid of the Observer magazine. So it wasn't even my fault. But I found it very hard to make money at it, because I think you have to be able to sort of crank them out. And I couldn't. And also the overheads are much higher than being a writer, because you have to keep buying supplies. So at the time, the choice was between being a failed cartoonist and a failed writer, and I chose failed writer because it was just, I would lose less money.
So were your ambitions always literary? You didn't want to be a Marine, or conquer Everest, or
I didn't want to be a Marine,
fly aeroplanes.
I think I was very, very shy as a child, and things like painting or drawing and writing were sort of, things you could do on your own, and then you could present to the world without necessarily having to be there present to stick up for them. So it always seemed logical to me. I think I probably also had a show-offy streak, and sort of wanted to perform, but I don't think I ever thought I was going to develop the nerve for that. So I gave up on that pretty quickly. Although now I do, now I'm after 30 years of being terrified of doing it, I'm better at appearing in public than I thought I would be.
It leads on to a good question on the Q&A about whether you're missing the band.
Mm-hmm.
I am missing the band. We do this quite regularly. We have these Zoom meetings some of which are about music, and some of which are just like people just scratching their heads and going, what are we going to do? We took a year off to sort of work on things, and we spent most of that year kind of huddled writing new songs, and then we've done most of the recording of a new CD, but we can't get into the studio to finish it off. All our gigs for this year are comeback gigs, as it were, got cancelled or postponed to next year. I don't know. I think the earliest the studio is going to sort of let us in is going to be next month, one at a time with social distancing. But luckily, it's only bits and pieces. Occasionally, I've had a socially distanced rehearsal with 2 members of the band in my back garden, having let them through the side gate. And that was mostly a remarkable realization of what happens if you don't rehearse regularly. How terrible you can sound quite quickly. So I'm hoping we can at least get back to playing together quite soon. We did a couple of things, kind of live gigs for some of the festivals we missed. We did sort of recorded songs in our separate hiding places, and then they were stitched together into a coherent whole by our drummer, who's good at that stuff. And those are available online somewhere on our YouTube channel or something.
Oh, there's a plug. So a number of questions asking about, I guess, both your inspirations and literary inspirations, but also the process of how long it takes you to get to that perfectly honed column on a Saturday, and at what point in the week does either inspiration strike, or is it really obviously easy, or does it feel like every word is wrested out of you kicking and screaming?
Well, I'll start with my influences. I think my influences, the ones that sort of count would be like American humorists like James Thurber. I'm very influenced by a lot of American writing, mostly sort of Southern Gothic writing, but I'm not sure how much of that creeps into my column. Writers like Flannery O'Connor and Carson McCullers. And these were like books that my mother read, books that were always in the house. The New Yorker cartoonist was my original great inspiration. And I suppose later the New Yorker writers, classic ones, would become the inspiration.
I have the bag.
Oh, you have the have you got a subscription as well?
Yeah, I had no idea that you got a bag when you subscribe. I was like, okay. And my background is so boring, it was the only interesting thing I could find to stick on the door.
I need a bag. I need to renew my subscription. The column itself, from the beginning, in the first sort of 6 months that I was doing it, it sort of consumed my life. And I realized that I wouldn't be able to carry on unless I could limit the amount of time in a week that I allowed myself to freak out about it. So I now, in the normal times, I do it on a Monday morning, and I just don't sleep very well on Sunday nights. Up until that, Tuesday through Saturday is fine. And then I get up very early on Monday, and usually I may have, in most cases, I will have at least settled on a topic, or at least part of a story I want to tell. But there are times, they're not that rare, where I get out here in the morning and I have no idea what I'm going to write. But it does come together in 3.5 hours. And that's, I don't know what to say about that. It's just because it has to. That's when the deadline is. And that's what I work to. And what I always have worked to is a deadline. And somehow, I think that the thing about a deadline is it allows you to give up on the idea that something's got to be really good. And otherwise I would just sit there and go, no, but it could be better. And I'll sort of think, maybe I need a better idea. Maybe I should wait for something else. Maybe I should wait till I think of something funnier. And you just think, oh here comes the deadline. You got to start. And then you just do the best you can under the circumstance. It's like doing your homework on the bus on the way to school. And if you told me that I was going to spend my whole life handing in one late assignment after another at the last minute, I would have said no way. But that's what it is. It's like school.
Is there a ratio between your willingness to involve your family and the panic of the deadline? I mean, on those days when you can't think of anything else, are you willing to push further how much you're going to reveal about funny wife and sons?
I'm ashamed to say that's probably true. I think one of the things that I very often, I'll have a topic that comes to me. Usually what the thing is, I look back on the week and think of some small humiliation that made sweat trickle across the top of my forehead. And I think, well, that will serve. But I very often think maybe I shouldn't do this because it's a bit new. Maybe my wife will be angry, or maybe this is too much of an invasion. And then I will go through the process of trying to think of something else. And that process always fails. I always end up returning to that first idea, because that sense of humiliation that makes these things work is key. So, I mean, eventually I will arrive at a place when it's done where I don't think I've invaded their privacy too much, or I've handled it better. But sometimes there is a reason, as you said, there's a reason where I've tried to dismiss it from my mind, and I can't. Sometimes that reason is when they say, you can't write about this, Dad.
As you might imagine, Tim, there are several questions about how your family responds, whether their egos are inflated, whether they're cross, whether after nearly 13 years they just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, well, it's another week.
Are you still paying them a $5 every time you mention them, or do they not notice anymore?
They don't notice. I mean, I've hardly ever had to pay them because they so rarely read it. I think it's one thing I've done is I have rowed back a bit as they've got older. I tended to think of them more as my property, my intellectual property, when they were sort of 8 and 9. But now they have a right to be not have their existences traduced for money, although that's where the money comes from. So I'm more careful than I used to be. And I think they probably I don't think they ever really read it. They're not regular readers of it, to be honest. My wife reads it every week.
Do you ever pass it by her in advance and say, can I do this? Or is it always after the event that?
Generally, it's after the event, because she's the sort of judge of whether I'm getting it right or not. She's the sort of, the way I think of it from the beginning, I always thought what I'm trying to do, because you don't get any feedback as a writer, generally speaking, or you used to get none. I was trying to make my wife laugh. And if she thought it was funny, she would laugh out loud while she was reading it in front of me. So that was always the aim. And sometimes, I can see her looking at her phone at 7 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday with a face of stone. And I know she's reading it. And so it hasn't quite worked out. And a case, but I think the surprise is important. So I don't want her to know what it's about or what it says before it comes out. I have in the past shown it to her ahead of time when I thought it might be controversial, and it was particularly if it had things to do with school or schooling and the children's schools. And every time I did show it to her, it was a very lucky thing that I did. She said, you cannot publish that. I mean, most of the time everything just is fine. Occasionally the editor of the magazine will drop me a line saying, did you mean to say that? And I'll say, no, that's a typo.
So our friend with the question that kind of wasn't a question has tuned in again. Please don't leave. He's worried that he's not got a question, but I guess the main characteristic of the period is that the urgency in capitals has been pulled from our lives. The challenge is to live fully despite this. Still can't fashion a question from this. Sorry, should I leave maybe? But actually there is something here that reminds me of the character whose name escapes me in About a Boy. You find yourself having to perhaps carve up your day, because otherwise the days just merge into one big blob. Because, well, I don't know, Matt and I probably spend more time on Zoom for work, perhaps Tim, than you do, but I started to dream in Zoom, which is not really that good, I think.
That is weird.
Yeah, well, my husband regularly tells me I need to get out more, but hey, there's a lockdown, so I can't.
I've got a funny feeling we're stuck with Zoom forever now, aren't we? I mean,
if only any of us had taken out shares beforehand. But yeah, I've started to kind of carve up my days in particular ways to try to distinguish one from the other. Or is that just normal life for you?
That is pretty, to be honest, that is pretty normal. I mean, I'm not a very good user of my time, generally speaking, but I have a diary. There's a couple of days a week where I have a sort of, at least one day a week where I'm on a rota with The Guardian for material that they might want to go live in the paper the next day or put online immediately. And they need people who are not going to say, well, I'm shopping, actually, I can't do it. So I come out here and I just kind of sit and wait for the email telling me what to do. Otherwise, if there are things like TV reviews, then I have to watch the program and make notes, and I'd like to watch it twice if I can. So I have to, and as Lucy Mangan once said about TV reviewing, she's, the TV reviewer, she said, it's the one part of my job I can't do any faster, is the watching of the show. So, you're not allowed to watch it at double speed, just to figure out how it ends. So I have to make time for that sort of thing. And so my day tends to be pretty rigidly parceled out into lunchtime. And then it tends to unravel, depending on, because I usually haven't got, either I'm really busy trying to get something done for the end of the day, or I technically have plenty of things to do, but none of them are immediate enough that I couldn't just, fool around on the internet until drinks time.
So that sums up the question of how much time do you spend procrastinating by doing DIY?
If it's the DIY has to be quite pressing, generally speaking. Otherwise, and I think sometimes if you've got something that you've got to write and you really don't want to write it, sometimes rehanging a door seems like a lot of fun in comparison. And I will do that, or just unclogging a toilet. Something you can't wait.
So just it's very disconcerting not being able to see the audience, but just for the audience, we're about 5 minutes away. So if you have any other questions, pop them in the Q&A, and Joan and I will try to get to them. But just one thing that strikes me, Tim, is listening to your cynicism book, is that there was quite a lot of politics in it, and quite a lot of very passionate politics. And yet that's something I don't think you write about at all, even when you're writing non-column pieces. And I just wonder, is that a deliberate decision? Not, I hate to use the word, although no reason to, not to sort of cloud the brand, or is it just that politics is too much trouble? Or but I was very struck, certainly towards the end of the cynicism book, and given that I listened to the audiobook, I can actually hear the passion. You're not keen on your president.
No, I would like to make that clear. I'm not keen on the president of the United States. Even he sent me a stimulus check, and I'm going to spend all that money trying to help him lose. I think part of the problem was sometimes you make decisions when you start out doing something, and they just carry on. You don't really give them that much thought. The first stop, I've never been asked to write a political piece. Occasionally I've written opinion pieces for the website, the Guardian website, and partly I guess even after 30 years, I feel quite keenly that I'm not British. That sometimes I feel like it would sound out of place coming from me, which is, as you say, if you get me started on American politics, I have a lot to say. And then at the same time, I feel a bit weird because I'm not there. I'm not involved. I sort of vote, and I vote in primaries, and I feel, I'm not doing enough. The biggest thing, most important thing I've done is to raise progressive, liberal, passionate, really angry children.
That's
a lot of that anger obviously comes back on to me.
That's the role.
Being liberal and progressive enough myself.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll end on a lighter note. So there are three sort of semi-personal questions that have emerged in the Q&A. One is about your hairdressers. I hope you won't take this the wrong way when I say I assume they've not been.
No.
That this is something you've done to yourself.
Yeah, it's not great. Well, it hardly matters, does it?
No, that's true. You're a writer. You don't have to look good. So the second is your ambition for the birds of the air to land on you. This has rather disappeared from your life, or at least from your reported life. Is that because of success, or have you given up?
No, it's because of abject failure. It couldn't have gone worse. I used up a whole bag of this these mealworms, whatever, which is supposed to be absolute catnip for robins, and I can't get them to come anywhere near me. And I think that's partly because the feeders are always full. It's partly because there's a cat sitting on the grass, but I am absolutely inundated with videos of people with birds all over them. People say, I think you just try this, and there's people with like 6 birds on them eating out of their hands. Someone sent me one of someone who's using like a mannequin's hand with a glove on it, and training the birds to land on that before they stick out their own hand, which I think it might be my next strategy.
What drove this ambition?
That it was that sense of frustration that I was accomplishing absolutely nothing during lockdown, and it was my dad used to go to the same deli for coffee every day because it was right around the corner from his office, and he used to drive up. And when I went with him once when I was probably in my mid-20s, and he drove up, and the second he parked, the birds of the air from all the trees around him would land on his car. And I was like, what's happening? And he said, I'll be right back. And he went into the shop, and he got a cup of coffee, and he got a muffin, and he sat in the car, and he drank the coffee, and he put little bits of the muffin on his left wing mirror. And the birds sort of queued up on the bonnet of his car, and one by one hopped onto the wing mirror and took their turn. And suddenly during lockdown, I thought, I could probably do that.
So you've reached the stage of life where you're turning into your dad.
Yeah, at the time I thought it was a little bit weird and creepy, and then now it seems like a really wholesome, vaulting ambition. But it turns out I've got no gift for it.
Well, I think, unless Joan has anything, I think our final question, because it leads to what we know that Tim has to go off and cook dinner because his wife's declared that she's never cooking again. We didn't get the background to that story, but perhaps I'll leave that and leave it with another anonymous attendee.
That's just lucky.
We have lots of anonymous attendees who ask, what are you eating tonight? I'm thinking of going for an immersive experience by having spicy ricey. Has that now been completely dismissed as an option by your family, or is spicy ricey still a thing?
Spicy ricey, I'm RIP spicy ricey, I'm afraid. My children they never liked it. And it was just a way of using up odds and ends with some rice. And I kept saying things like, my mistake was to say something like, it's like risotto. And they said, it's not. And one of them stormed into the kitchen and made risotto. And that was that. That's what we have now. Once a week, make him.
Never bring up sophisticated children, Tim. You should have just.
I said in a column that it was like watching a cat install a satellite dish. I had no idea where he learned to make this, or how he knows the first thing about risotto.
I once visited a man in Washington, D.C. who was late to an appointment, and he arrived with a small child, and he said, I've been to Disney World. I'm sorry, I'm late. And I looked kind of puzzled and said, Disney World? And he sort of winked, and the child left the room, and he said, well, for as long as she doesn't know the Disney Store and Disney World are not the same place, I'm not going to tell her. So, your mistake was introducing them to risotto. That's clearly
my fault.
Great. Well, we've got to 8 o'clock, so it's my job to offer the vote of thanks. Before I do that, just to remind everyone in the audience that there is a recording of this event that will be available on the festival YouTube channel, and can be accessed from the Watch Again section of the festival website. If you want to purchase copies of Tim's books, How to Be a Husband and Dad You Suck, then do order them from our independent book seller, Fox Lane Books. And if you look up Fox Lane Books, you'll find the web address, and that's also on the website. And it's great to try and support an independent bookseller at what is a very difficult time. Finally, I'll just say before I turn to Tim, this is the last event of the online Festival Ideas. I chair something every year, and I always say it is a tremendous thing. It's a fantastic series of events. It is even more remarkable this year that Joan and her team have managed to phoenix-like have managed to put on a festival despite lockdown, and it's been a tremendous success. And we are all in awe of both Joan and her team, and also very grateful to all the speakers. So finally, then, to thank Tim, who has to go and cook. It's been wonderful to see you yet again, Tim. I hope you'll continue to grace us with your presence. It's quite clear from the Q&A that people, the number of people who start with, I read your column every Saturday, it's great, I love your column, and then ask questions about, they clearly do, because there are lots of questions about, your shirts, your table, your birds of the air, your tortoise, your cat, your squirrel. So people are not only reading it, but paying attention, and we all know why, which is because it's so much fun. So thank you very much for joining us. And to the 245 attendees out there, thank you ever so much for joining us too. And we hope to see you in person next year at Festival of Ideas 2021. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.